I never expected that a leaky ceiling and a borrowed hoodie would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Before all that, my world was a small, carefully constructed thing built for one. It was safe, it was predictable, and it was, if I'm being completely honest with myself, profoundly lonely. My name is Lucas. I'm 26, and my job as a freelance copywriter means my most consistent relationship is with my laptop. I live on the third floor of an apartment building that has what real estate agents charitably call character. This mostly means the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor sneeze, and the plumbing groans like a ghost with indigestion. But it was mine. My routine was my fortress. I'd wake up, make coffee, sit at my desk by the window, and write. The highlight of my day was often the moment the sun hit the plant on my windowsill just right. It was a quiet life. The apartment next to mine had been empty for a few months, a silent void that I'd grown accustomed to. Then, one Saturday, the sounds of shuffling furniture and muffled thuds announced a new arrival. I peered through my peephole, my usual mode of neighborhood surveillance. I saw him in flashes, broad shoulders straining against a gray t-shirt, arms tanned and defined from carrying heavy boxes, a mess of dark brown hair damp with sweat. Later that day, I saw him more clearly when I went to check my mail. He was talking to Mrs. Gable from down the hall, and he gave her a smile that seemed to light up the entire dim corridor. He was handsome in an easy, unpretentious way. He looked like the kind of guy who played pickup basketball on the weekends and knew how to fix a car engine. He looked, in every conceivable way, straight. My heart did a familiar, disappointing little dip. I had a name for him now, Julian. I'd heard Mrs. Gable say it. In the weeks that followed, Julian became a background fixture in my life. I'd hear the low murmur of a sports broadcast through the wall, or the cheerful jingle of his keys as he left in the morning. We had a few brief, hallway encounters. A nod, a quick, hey, a shared, awkward wait for the slow-moving elevator. Each time, my heart would beat a little faster. He was always friendly, always had that easy smile ready, but to me, he felt like he was on a different planet. I was the quiet, indoor observer. He was the vibrant, outdoor participant in life. He was a beautiful, unattainable thing, so I filed him away under crushes that will go nowhere and tried to focus on my deadlines. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You build your walls, you accept your routines, and you tell yourself it's enough. You get used to the quiet, but you never account for the rain. The storm started on a Friday night. It wasn't a gentle spring shower. It was a relentless, angry downpour that hammered against my window panes and made the whole city feel like it was underwater. The sky was a bruised purple-gray, and the wind howled around the corners of the building. I actually found it cozy at first. I made a cup of tea, put on some music, and settled into work. The sound of the rain was a comforting white noise. That comfort lasted until about 10 o'clock Saturday morning. That's when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic drip. I paused my music. Drip, drip, drip. It was slow, but persistent. I looked around, confused. The sound was coming from near my desk. I looked up. There, on the textured white ceiling, was a small, spreading water stain, a pale brown circle like a tea bag left for too long. And from its center, a single drop of water was gathering, swelling, and then falling onto my wooden floor. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before the panic set in. My desk, my laptop, my monitors, my hard drives. My entire livelihood was directly underneath that sinister little spot. I lunged forward, frantically unplugging everything and dragging the heavy desk away from the wall. The dripping picked up its pace. Drip, drip, drip. I grabbed a pot from the kitchen and placed it on the floor, where it began to collect the water with a series of metallic plinks that sounded like a countdown to disaster. I called the emergency maintenance line for the building. A bored-sounding recording informed me that due to the severe weather, response times would be significantly delayed. They would get to me as soon as possible. It was the corporate equivalent of a shrug. I felt a wave of helpless frustration wash over me. I was alone, my apartment was slowly flooding, and there was nothing I could do. I started pacing, running my hands through my hair, my mind racing with images of a collapsed ceiling and ruined electronics. It was the sound of my frantic shuffling and the occasional muttered curse that must have traveled through the wall. Or maybe it was just fate, because a few minutes later, there was a firm knock on my door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked over and looked through the peephole. It was Julian. He was holding a coffee mug and looked concerned. I opened the door a crack. "Hey," I managed, my voice probably sounding as frayed as I felt. "Hey," he said, his brow furrowed. "Everything okay over here?" Sounded like you were rearranging your whole apartment. His voice was deeper, calmer than I'd imagined. I couldn't even summon the energy to be embarrassed. I just opened the door wider and gestured vaguely towards the ceiling. "Leak," I said, the word coming out flat and defeated. Julian's eyes went from the pot on the floor to the spreading stain on the ceiling. He didn't say "that's rough" or offer any other useless platitudes. He just set his mug down on my entryway table, walked past me into the room, and looked at the damage with a critical, appraising eye. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt, and he moved with a quiet competence that was immensely reassuring. "Maintenance line is a bust, I take it?" he asked, his gaze still fixed on the ceiling. I just nodded numbly. "Right," he said, more to himself than to me. "Okay, this is probably coming from the roof. It's only going to get worse with this rain." He turned to me, and for the first time, I felt like he was really looking at me, not just past me in the hallway. His eyes were a warm hazel. "You can't stay here," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. "Your electronics are safe over there for now, but the plaster could come down. You should pack a bag. You can stay with me until they get this sorted." I was so taken aback I could only stare at him. Stay with him? In his apartment? The thought sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic through me, immediately followed by a wave of something else, something warm and hopeful that I quickly tried to suppress. "Oh no, I couldn't," I stammered. "I'll be fine. It's just a small leak." He gave me a small, patient smile. "Lucas, it's not a small leak. And it's not an offer. I'm not going to listen to you worrying through the wall all weekend while your ceiling caves in. Grab your laptop, a change of clothes, whatever you need. My place is dry." He said it with such simple, undeniable authority that I found myself nodding before I had even fully processed the decision. My carefully constructed world, with its predictable routines and its fortress of solitude, had just been breached, and I was walking willingly into the new territory, following the handsome stranger from next door. Walking into Julian's apartment felt like stepping into a different version of my own. The layout was a mirror image, but the atmosphere was entirely his. Where my place was filled with books and meticulously arranged objects, his was minimalist and functional. There was a large, comfortable-looking gray sofa, a simple wooden coffee table, and a television on a stand. There were no pictures on the walls yet, just a few canvases leaning against one another in a corner. It was a space in progress, but it felt warm and lived in, not sterile. It smelled faintly of coffee and clean laundry. "Sorry about the mess," he said, gesturing around the uncluttered room. "Still unpacking, you know?" I found his apology endearing. My own version of a mess involved a coffee cup left out for more than an hour. He cleared a stack of mail from the end of the sofa. "Make yourself at home. Seriously." I placed my overnight bag and laptop case carefully by the door, feeling like an awkward guest at a party I hadn't meant to attend. The sound of the rain was softer here, more distant. The rhythmic plinking from my apartment was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and quiet. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. My social anxiety, always lurking just beneath the surface, began to flare up. What were we supposed to do? Just sit here? Julian seemed to sense my unease. "You hungry?" he asked, heading toward the small galley kitchen. I was just about to make some lunch. "I can make extra." The offer was so normal, so simple, that it immediately put me at ease. I nodded. "Yeah, that would be great. Thank you." We spent the next hour in a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. He cooked, and I sat at his small dining table, offering to help but being gently waved away. We started to talk. Not the stilted hallway pleasantries, but a real conversation. I asked him about his move, and he told me he worked in construction, managing building sites. It explained his practical, no-nonsense attitude, and, I noted internally, his impressive physique. He asked me what I did, and when I told him I was a writer, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. He didn't make the usual jokes about starving artists or ask if I was writing the next great American novel. He asked what kind of things I wrote, what I enjoyed about it. The afternoon bled into the evening. The rain never let up, effectively trapping us in his apartment, a small, dry island in a sea of gray. We migrated to the couch, and he put on a movie, some mindless action flick that neither of us paid much attention to. The real focus was the conversation that flowed in the pauses. It was here, in the dim light of the television, that my carefully constructed image of him began to crumble, replaced by someone far more interesting. I noticed the canvases in the corner again. "Are you an artist?" I asked during a particularly loud explosion on screen. He glanced over at them, and a faint blush crept up his neck. "Nah, not really," he said, trying to sound casual. "I just doodle." I must have looked unconvinced, because he let out a small sigh. "Okay, fine." He got up, walked over to the corner, and picked up a large, black sketchbook from behind the canvases. He brought it back to the couch and hesitated for a moment before handing it to me. "Don't laugh." I opened it carefully. It was filled with drawings. But they weren't doodles. They were intricate, detailed pencil sketches of buildings. Old cathedrals, modern skyscrapers, fantastical structures that seemed to defy gravity. The lines were clean and confident. The shading was masterful. They were beautiful. "Julian, these are incredible," I said, my voice full of genuine awe. "You're really, really good." He looked down at the book, a shy smile playing on his lips. "I wanted to be an architect," he said quietly. "I was in school for it, but stuff happened. My dad got sick, and I had to drop out and start working to help my family. The construction gig pays the bills," he shrugged, but I could see a flicker of old disappointment in his eyes. "It's fine. I still get to be around buildings all day, just not designing them." In that moment, he ceased to be Julian, the hot, unattainable neighbor. He became Julian, the man who had given up a dream for his family, the artist who hid his talent in a sketchbook in the corner of his room. A wave of empathy and something warmer, something much more dangerous, washed over me. He was no longer just a surface to project my fantasies onto. He was a person, with depth and history and a quiet vulnerability that he kept hidden behind an easy smile. Later, as the movie ended, I must have shivered. The dampness from my own apartment seemed to have seeped into my bones. I tried to hide it, wrapping my arms around myself, but he noticed immediately. "You cold?" he asked. Before I could answer, he stood up and disappeared into his bedroom. He came back a moment later holding a dark blue hoodie. It was thick and soft-looking. He didn't toss it to me. He walked over and gently draped it over my shoulders. His fingers brushed against the back of my neck for a fleeting second, and a jolt went through me, sharp and electric. The hoodie was huge on me, the sleeves hanging down past my hands. But it was incredibly warm, and it smelled like him. Not cologne, but something subtle and clean, a mix of his laundry detergent and a faint, uniquely masculine scent that was just Julian. I pulled it tighter around me, inhaling discreetly. My heart was doing a frantic, chaotic dance in my chest. It was such a simple, almost brotherly gesture. But in the charged quiet of the apartment, with the rain still drumming against the glass, it felt like so much more. It felt like an anchor. The rain finally stopped on Monday morning. The maintenance guy showed up, a cheerful man who seemed completely unfazed by the gaping, soggy hole that was now in my ceiling. He promised it would be patched and repainted by the end of the day. The crisis was over. I had spent 2 nights sleeping on Julian's comfortable sofa and 2 days living in a strange, domestic bubble with him. We'd shared meals, movies, and conversations. It was the most time I'd spent with another person in months, and I felt a pang of genuine sadness that it was coming to an end. That afternoon, I moved my things back into my own apartment. The air smelled of wet plaster and fresh paint, but it was mine. The silence felt different now. It wasn't comforting, it was just empty. The only remnant of my weekend next door was his blue hoodie, which I had folded neatly and placed on my armchair. I had to return it. The thought of it was both a necessity and a source of intense anxiety. It was my only legitimate reason to knock on his door again, to see him, to talk to him. But it also felt like a final act, the closing of a chapter. I spent the rest of the day trying to work, but my focus was shot. My mind kept drifting back to moments from the weekend. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. The quiet concentration on his face as he showed me his drawings. The feeling of his fingers on my neck when he gave me the hoodie. Was I imagining things? Was the connection I felt just a product of forced proximity and my own loneliness? He had been kind, a good neighbor. That was all. To assume anything more would be foolish. I told myself this over and over, trying to brace for the inevitable return to polite, hallway nods. Before I could lose my nerve, I decided I had to do it. I took the hoodie, which I had washed and dried that afternoon. It smelled of my lavender fabric softener now, a strange imposition of my scent on his property. It felt ridiculously intimate. I held it in my hands, the fabric still warm from the dryer, and took a deep breath. Then I walked out of my apartment and knocked on his door. He opened it almost immediately, as if he had been expecting me. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and his hair was slightly damp, probably from a shower. "Hey," he said, his smile a little more reserved than it had been all weekend. "Hey," I replied, my voice sounding unnaturally high. I held out the folded sweatshirt. I just wanted to return this. Thanks again. For everything. The hoodie, the couch, saving my apartment from becoming an indoor swimming pool. I was rambling. He looked at the hoodie in my hands, then back at my face. He took it from me, but he didn't put it aside. His fingers brushed against mine as he took it, and that same little electric shock sparked between us. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. The air in the hallway grew thick with unspoken words. "Here," he said suddenly, his voice low. "Let me." Before I could ask what he meant, he unfolded the hoodie. He took a step closer to me, and my breath hitched in my throat. He held it open, like a cape, and then he raised it up and began to pull it over my head. My brain short-circuited. What was happening? His hands were gentle as he guided the fabric over my hair. For a second, his knuckles grazed my cheek, his touch feather-light. Then the world went dark and soft. The hoodie enveloped my head, muffling the sounds of the hallway and filling my senses with the clean scent of my own laundry. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was momentarily blinded, suspended in this strange, intimate space he had created. It was dark, but I could feel his closeness. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. And then, under the dark, soft canopy of his sweatshirt, I felt his breath on my face. One of his hands came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. He gently tilted my chin up. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch into an infinite, heart-stopping moment. And then his lips met mine. It wasn't a demanding kiss. It was impossibly soft, tentative, a question asked without words. It was warm and gentle, and it sent a shockwave through my entire system, a current that lit up every nerve ending I possessed. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, but it contained a universe of feeling. It was the most terrifying and wonderful thing I had ever experienced. Just as quickly as it began, it was over. He pulled the hoodie the rest of the way down, letting it settle over my shoulders. The harsh fluorescent light of the hallway seemed to blind me for a second. I blinked, trying to reorient myself. He was standing right in front of me, his hand still resting on my shoulder. His face was completely open, his usual easy confidence gone, replaced by a raw, heart-stopping vulnerability. He was watching me, waiting, his hazel eyes searching mine for a reaction. And I, for the life of me, couldn't give him one. I was completely and utterly speechless. I don't remember what I said. I think it was a stammered, good night. It was pathetic. I practically fled. I turned and retreated the few steps to my own door, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. I didn't dare look back. I got inside, shut the door, and leaned my back against it, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. I was wearing his hoodie again. My mind was a chaotic storm of confusion, disbelief, and a wild, soaring hope that was so powerful it scared me. What had just happened? The next day was torture. Pure, unadulterated, agonizing torture. I replayed the moment at his doorway 1,000 times. The look in his eyes, the way he pulled the hoodie over my head, the impossible softness of his lips. Every detail was seared into my memory. But the clarity of the memory didn't help. It only fed the cyclone of my overthinking. Did that really happen? Or was it some kind of bizarre, shared hallucination brought on by rain and plaster dust? It had felt too real to be a dream. But the implications were too huge to be real. Julian kissed me. Julian, the handsome, confident, almost certainly straight guy from next door, had kissed me. My brain, in a desperate act of self-preservation, immediately began offering up alternative explanations. It was an impulse, a mistake. He was probably drunk or just feeling weird after the strange, isolated weekend. Maybe he was just curious. That was a big one. The bi-curious phase. I had been an experiment, a convenient test case just a few feet away. The thought made my stomach clench with a feeling that was part humiliation, part dread. I was convinced he regretted it. The proof was in the silence. All day Tuesday, there was nothing. Not a text, though I wasn't even sure he had my number, and not a sound from his apartment. I found myself listening intently, trying to decipher his movements through the wall. The silence felt accusatory. It felt like avoidance. I had to leave my apartment in the afternoon to drop off a package. I spent a full 5 minutes standing at my door, my hand on the knob, taking deep breaths like a soldier about to go over the top. I opened it and practically scurried down the hall. On my way back from the elevator, my worst fear was realized. His door opened just as I was approaching. He stepped out, and we were suddenly face to face. The easy camaraderie of the weekend was gone. In its place was an awkwardness so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was focused on locking his door. "Hey," I squeaked back, my gaze fixed on the hideous floral pattern of the hallway carpet. We stood there for a beat, trapped in the silence. Then he just nodded quickly and walked away towards the stairs, leaving me standing there, my heart sinking into my shoes. That sealed it. It was a mistake. He was embarrassed. He regretted it. And now I had made things so unbelievably awkward that we couldn't even look at each other. The tiny, beautiful ember of hope that had been glowing inside me since the kiss was extinguished, doused by a tidal wave of anxiety and self-doubt. I was an idiot. I had let myself believe, for just a moment, that something impossible could happen. I went back into my apartment and threw myself into my work, writing with a frantic energy fueled by disappointment. I would be professional. I would be a good neighbor. I would go back to the polite nods and the elevator silence. I would forget the feeling of his lips and the secret, dark world created by a simple blue hoodie. I would bury the hope so deep it could never hurt me again. I told myself it was for the best. But every time I moved, I caught a faint scent of him on the hoodie I was still wearing, a cruel reminder of what I had so briefly, foolishly, allowed myself to want. The silence from his apartment wasn't just quiet anymore. It was the sound of rejection. That evening, I was curled up on my sofa, wrapped in his hoodie like a security blanket, trying to lose myself in a book. But the words on the page were just a jumble of black marks. My mind was still next door. Every creak of the building made me jump, half expecting, half dreading another encounter. I was wallowing in my own misery, composing a mental eulogy for the shortest, most confusing romance in history. Then, there was a knock on my door. It was firm, decisive, just like the first time. My heart leaped into my throat. It had to be him. There was no one else it could be. For a wild second, I considered not answering. I could pretend I was asleep, or out. I could hide, but I knew I couldn't. This limbo was unbearable. I needed to know, one way or another. I walked to the door, my legs feeling unsteady. I took a deep breath and opened it. Julian was standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. He looked profoundly nervous. The easygoing confidence was gone, stripped away completely. He was biting his lower lip, and his eyes were full of a troubled energy. "Lucas," he said, his voice a little hoarse. Can we talk?" For a minute. I just nodded, my own voice having abandoned me. I stepped back to let him in. He walked into the middle of my living room, and then just stood there, looking lost. I closed the door behind him, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence. I braced myself. This was it. The apology. The "I'm not gay but" speech. The "let's just be friends" conversation that I had been dreading all day. "Look," he started, turning to face me. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a nervous tic. "About the other night. And today in the hall. I'm so sorry. I've been a complete idiot." My stomach plummeted. "It's okay," I said quickly, trying to make it easier for both of us. "Don't worry about it. It was a weird weekend. We can just forget it happened." "No," he said, shaking his head firmly. "That's just it. I don't want to forget it happened. That's the last thing I want." He took a hesitant step closer. "The thing is, Lucas, I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you since the day I moved in." My brain stuttered to a halt. I could only stare at him. "What?" He let out a short, frustrated breath. "I saw you that first day. You were getting your mail, and you were so focused on sorting through it. You didn't even see me. And I don't know. I got this feeling. I wanted to talk to you, but I completely lost my nerve. Every time I saw you in the hall, I'd planned to say something more than just hey, but I'd just freeze up. I was so worried I was reading things wrong, that I'd make you uncomfortable. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to understand. When I heard the noise from your apartment, and I saw the leak, I'm not going to lie, my first thought was this is my chance. It was a terrible thought, but it was true. It was an excuse to finally talk to you. And this whole weekend, it's been amazing, better than I even could have imagined. He paused, taking another breath. And the kiss, that was not an impulse. That was me, in the most clumsy, awkward way I could possibly manage, trying to show you how I feel, because I am terrible with words. I thought maybe you felt it too. But then you just ran off, and today you wouldn't even look at me, and I was convinced I had just ruined everything. That I'd completely misread the entire situation and made you hate me. The torrent of his confession washed over me, sweeping away all my carefully constructed fears and anxieties. He wasn't rejecting me. He was just as scared as I was. He had been feeling the same things, wrestling with the same uncertainty. The relief was so sudden and so overwhelming that it felt like I could finally breathe again after holding my breath for 2 days. A laugh bubbled up out of me. It was a shaky, watery sound. You thought I hated you? I said, my voice cracking. Julian, I spent all day convinced that you hated me. I thought it was a mistake, that you were straight and I was just some weird experiment. A look of profound relief washed over his face. Straight? He said, a small, incredulous smile finally breaking through his anxiety. No, definitely not straight. And just like that, the tension shattered. We were just two people, standing in a living room, finally saying the things we had been too afraid to say. I told him how I'd felt since he moved in, how I had been so intimidated by him, so sure he was out of my league. We laid all our fears and assumptions out on the table, and in the space between us, something new and real began to form. He closed the remaining distance between us. He reached out and gently touched the sleeve of the hoodie I was still wearing. So, can I try that again? He asked, his voice soft. The kiss, I mean, but maybe without a hoodie-related kidnapping this time. I laughed again, a Rayal laugh this time. Yeah, I said, my voice full of a warmth I hadn't felt in a very long time. I think I'd like that. He smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile that made my heart ache in the best possible way. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones, and he kissed me. And this time, there was no hesitation. It wasn't a question. It was an answer. It was confident and sure and full of all the feeling we had been holding back. It was the beginning of everything. In the weeks that followed, the hallways of our apartment building transformed. They were no longer a space of awkward avoidance, but a prelude to a welcome home. Our separate apartments began to feel like two rooms of the same home. My door was always open to him, his to me. The thin walls were no longer a source of annoyance, but a comfort. Hearing his movements next door was a reminder that he was there, just a few feet away. We had our first real date a few days after our conversation. We went to a small Italian restaurant downtown. It felt wonderfully, terrifyingly normal. We talked for hours over pasta and cheap red wine, filling in the gaps of each other's lives, sharing stories from our childhoods, our dreams, our disappointments. I learned about his family, about the little sister he adored. He learned about my passion for old books and my secret fear of public speaking. It was easy. It was effortless. It felt like I had known him for years. Soon, our lives began to merge in small, significant ways. My coffee maker ended up on his kitchen counter because he admitted mine was better. His sketchbook found a permanent home on my coffee table, where I could flip through it whenever I wanted. We started cooking dinner together most nights, our movements a comfortable dance in his small kitchen. We fell into a routine that was no longer a fortress, but a shared rhythm. It was a life built for two. There were moments that felt so cinematic, so perfectly romantic, that I had to remind myself they were real. Lying on his sofa on a lazy Sunday afternoon, my head on his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart under my ear. Walking through the park on a crisp autumn day and feeling him reach for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine without a second thought. These were the small, quiet moments that I had once only dreamed about, and now they were my reality. One evening, a couple of months after that first rainy weekend, we were at my place, watching a movie. I was cold, so I got up and pulled on the blue hoodie, which now lived in my closet. It was worn in and impossibly soft, a tangible symbol of how our story had begun. I settled back onto the couch, and Julian wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. He looked at me, a playful glint in his hazel eyes. He reached up and gently pulled the hood over my head, just like he had that first time. The world narrowed for a moment, just like it had before. But this time, there was no fear, no uncertainty. There was only warmth and love. He leaned in, and under the soft cover of the hood, he kissed me. It was a gentle, loving kiss that tasted of familiarity and promise. When he pulled back, I smiled. Much better than the first time, I murmured. I don't know, he said, his lips brushing against mine as he spoke. The first one had a certain panic charm. I used to believe that life was something you had to carefully manage, that love was a chaotic force to be kept at a safe distance. I thought safety was in solitude, in the predictable quiet of a life lived alone. But I was wrong. A leaky ceiling didn't ruin my life, it opened it up. A borrowed hoodie didn't just keep me warm. It led me to a home I didn't know I was searching for. Julian taught me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a bridge. It's the terrifying, beautiful risk you take when you realize the person on the other side might just be as scared and as hopeful as you are. And sometimes, the safest, most wonderful place in the entire world is the small, dark space created by a shared piece of clothing, where a hesitant first kiss can change absolutely everything.